Welcome to another Agrivisions podcast brought to you by First Dakota National Bank. I'm Nate Franzén, President of Ag Banking at First Dakota, and your host. And today I have with me one of our very own longtime leaders here in the First Dakota Ag Division, Jeff Wolfgram. Jeff oversees our DakotaMAC area as well as some of our Yankton ag lending activities. And Jeff, say hello to our crowd and tell us a little about yourself.
Hello, and thank you, Nate, for this opportunity to talk about myself and DakotaMAC. Yeah, it's been great to be a part of this organization since, August 21st, 1995 was my first day here at First Dakota. And I joined a department that was called DakotaMAC, and honestly, it took me about 90 days to figure out exactly what DakotaMAC even was.
Yeah, you were really on the front end of that, not the day it started, but not long after it started.
Yeah, Denny Everson and Laura Abbott-Kreibel started DakotaMAC in July of 1993. Yeah. So I think that would make 2023 our 30-year anniversary.
Yeah, so that is one of the biggest things we really want to talk about is 30 years of DakotaMAC, which we're extremely proud of. But before we get to that, tell folks a little bit more about where you grew up, your background a little bit, and then we'll get into the history of DakotaMAC.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Born and raised in a small community, Madison, Nebraska, about 75 miles straight south of Yankton, right on Highway 81. Moved up here to Yankton and actually graduated from Mount Marty University in 1993 with a business degree. Played a little bit of basketball there. Met my wife at Mount Marty University. Moved back and worked at my hometown bank in Madison, Nebraska for a couple years, and wanted to come back to Yankton. And through a connection at Mount Marty University, at that time Mount Marty College, got an interview with Denny Everson, and like I said, I started in August of 1995. It's hard to believe it's been almost 28 years ago.
Yeah. So I'm approaching my 25th anniversary, so Jeff's got more history with First Dakota than I do. But I can tell you from day one when I started, it's been very obvious Jeff's a strong leader for our team and has done great things in DakotaMAC. So let's talk about that. 30 years. If you think back to when DakotaMAC started, we were pretty unique at that point in time, weren't we? How many banks out there were doing what we were doing at that point in time?
Not very many. There was probably, I wouldn't even say a dozen. Maybe there were half a dozen. DakotaMAC was started because there was a company called Farmer Mac. And the story that Denny Everson tells a lot more eloquently than I do is he went out to Washington, D.C., found out about Farmer Mac, and by the time he flew back from D.C. to South Dakota, he talks about the different stops that he made. And by the time he landed in Sioux Falls, it wasn't just that we were going to originate Farmer Mac loans, but we were going to have our own division to do this and really specialize in it and really grow from that dream that Denny had 30 years ago.
You know, just for our listeners' perspective, Farmer Mac was actually established because of the 1980s farm crisis. When the farm credit system was bailed out by our government because of the problems they incurred due to the 1980s farm crisis, it was decided we needed more long-term fixed-rate capital, and that was the birth of Farmer Mac, which really spurred on our opportunity as a bank to not just consider being a part of it, but to embrace it and to really develop a strategy to have a focused division that is 100% focused on that all day, every day.
It is, and I can remember coming from my hometown bank and coming to First Dakota, and at that time, I think First Dakota had 5 or 6 branches, and I remember we were about a $220 million bank. And I thought I went to the biggest bank in the United States. I mean, it seemed like a giant bank, and at that time it was pretty big. But I also think about the growth that First Dakota's had in the last 30 years. And you mentioned interest rates. That's one of the other things that I'll never forget Denny Everson coming into my office early on in my career and saying, we have to tell everybody, because this is the first time interest rates have ever been single digits, Jeff. They're 9 point something today. And I just thought, I don't know anything about that. Is that good or is that bad? But Denny went through the 80s and experienced interest rates where they were in the teens.
Yep. Yeah, and since then it's pretty amazing how the markets have changed, how rates have went up and down, but in most recent history, really, really low, right? We're coming out of maybe the lowest interest rate environment in history only a few years ago.
Yeah, I think if you look at when COVID hit in March of 2020, historically, I think that would be about the lowest point that interest rates have ever gotten.
Yeah. I think about how DakotaMAC fits into our overall goal of positioning our clients for success for the long term.
Yeah.
And boy, we can see it today as long-term rates and short-term rates have really jumped in the last several years. We were fortunate to be very proactive with our clients, recommending they lock in those all-time low rates.
Yeah.
And today, we've got a lot of clients that are in a much better position to weather the rising interest rate environment than most because of it.
Yeah, I believe the statistic is that 93% of our portfolio locked in a rate for 10 years or greater when they were at that historical low levels in the 2020s and 2021. And we
Yeah.
feel really good about that. I mean, to have the tools and to have the options for our bankers and our clients is something that didn't exist.
Yeah.
It just wasn't out there in the 80s.
Yeah, tremendous situation for us to help our clients capitalize out of the recent environment. Talk a little bit about DakotaMAC's growth. Obviously, when you came here,
Yeah.
we had very few loans at the time. DakotaMAC was a brand new idea and strategy. Talk about from then till now and kind of the growth of DakotaMAC.
Yeah, I'd love to. So when I started, we probably had a portfolio of about $5 to $10 million. And it's kind of interesting because our target involved First Dakota bankers and First Dakota banks, but a big part of our target audience was working with non-First Dakota banks. I talked about how First Dakota was about a $220 million bank. A lot of what Denny and I spent the first maybe 5 to 10 years of was going out and talking to other banks. And we wanted to be, DakotaMAC wanted to be the conduit for their bank, and then we would be the conduit to get that loan into what we still refer to as the secondary market, or at that time, Farmer Mac. But back to the growth standpoint, it's interesting to look back. I can remember in 95, 96, where we averaged, if we did $10 to $12 million a year, I mean, it was time for celebration. And everybody understands what land values have done in the last couple of decades, but still, even from a numerical standpoint, the number of originations was maybe 20.
Yep.
And fast forwarding to 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, we've been averaging about $140 million a year.
Yep.
So what we used to do in a month, now we're accustomed to doing, what we used to do in a year, now we're accustomed to doing in a month.
Yep.
Where we average about $10 to $15 million of loan volume every single month in DakotaMAC.
Where are we at for total assets under management within our DakotaMAC division?
If you include what we consider DakotaMAC 1 loans, which is secondary market, our FSA loans, our Iron Country loans, and our in-house portfolio, we exceed $750 million worth of managed assets. And that's one of the things that we are very, very proud of. I can't wait to the day that we exceed $1 billion.
Yep.
It's going to happen. I know it's going to happen.
Yep.
And that's going to be yet another big time for celebration.
Tremendous growth, and of course that growth has mirrored the growth of the bank. You touched on our strategy to help other banks. We still do some of that, but certainly as our company has grown, more and more of our business comes from within as well.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that back. When I started, 90% of our business was with non-First Dakota banks. And now I would say 90 to 95% of our business is with our First Dakota branches and their clients. And another big thing in the whole DakotaMAC history was our loan production offices. And those started with the first one in 1999.
Yep.
And that was one of the real pivotal points in the history of DakotaMAC, when Boyd Minery joined our team and opened up the first ever DakotaMAC LPO in a big city of Elgin, Nebraska, population 200.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we've since expanded that, as you well know, to several loan production offices in Nebraska and a couple in South Dakota and one in Iowa now, and we continue to look for opportunities to bring on the right people in the right places for that to continue to work for us.
Yeah, it's been really rewarding to see that growth, to see from the start of the first one to, as you mentioned, now where there's 7 different loan production officers and in 3 different states. It's fun to see how we deliver services today and how we continue to enhance that, and really how we really try to cater that to our clients.
That's right.
And if a client wants us to come out to their kitchen table on their turf, we're ready to do that. And we can, I can confidently say that we can deliver our DakotaMAC loans as efficiently through our loan production offices as we can through our branches.
Yeah.
With great people and technology and all those things.
In my job, I get asked a lot, Nate, what's your territory for your ag banking division? And I always have 2 answers. Well, here's where our branches and loan production offices are. But going back to the comment you made about our strategy to work with other banks, you know the number better than I, but how many states have we originated ag real estate loans in over the years?
We've originated loans in 17 different states.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the latest number. We're looking to add to that, but right now it would be 17.
This has been another Agrivisions podcast brought to you by First Dakota National Bank.